Like many businesses, the Wittenberg Telephone Company started with a problem. Farmers in rural communities needed a way to communicate during the turn of the 20th century. While early telephone adopters made it work with telephone wires strung together on farm posts, bigger scale necessitated bigger organization.
There was an Eldrin telephone company that had Eland and Eldrin in the rural. There was a Wittenberg rural. The farmers had their own line, or like Homestead used to be, a Homestead used to have it, Fern used to have their own, the farmers did. And that's how my dad got involved in it. And Grandpa Charlie, he was the treasurer of that thing. It was just the farmers took care of it themselves. There was one old guy that took care of it. He came over with a horse and wagon one day. He was sick of working on it. He'd give it to my grandpa. He says, here's a wire and insulators and a couple of old phones, and, you know, these long some batteries and that they had. And he'd give it to my grandpa, and he says, here, you take this. I'm not going to monkey with this anymore. My grandpa, he was too busy farming, so he said, hey, Ray, here, you take this. And he was 14 years old.
Raymond Peterson may have gotten into the telephone industry at an early age, but he certainly made an immediate impact. After serving in World War I, he helped bring together a sprawling number of telephone startups.
Then the guys that had the Wittenberg Telephone Company and the Eldrin and the rural, they decided to merge it. The Wittenberg rural, the farmers decided to buy from this guy in town. They needed somebody to run it, so they said to my dad, well, why don't you take this? Well, I'm busy farming. He was farming with my grandpa. So, well, I'll try it out. So he started out 21. They organized the Wittenberg Telephone Company, and then they had that's when that was incorporated, and they took over Eldrin and the Wittenberg Rural and Wittenberg, and that's where it all started. You had to buy one share of stock.
The Wittenberg Telephone Company was born in 1921 under the ownership of a small group of shareholders and the guidance of Peterson.
In 1921, there was a switch that was purchased and placed in the upper level of a store on Main Street. And that's where the operators were. And they would have a cord board, which they would pull the cord out and put it into a different slot to transfer the call. Then on the exterior, they had telephone wires that were mounted on telephone poles. There was nothing buried underground at that time, and everything was aerial and went to the individual homes, and that's how you communicated.
The early telephone experience was revolutionary for its time, but quite primitive compared to today.
The old magneto crank phones, they were the big wooden ones on the wall, and you'd crank it. That would send a signal to the operator that you want to make a call.
The operator would want to say, number please. And most people gave a name, very few gave a number because the operators were sharper on that than most people were. But yeah, that's how you did it.
While customers might have picked up their own phone, it didn't mean they owned the line. They had to share the line with up to 10 people in what was known as a party line.
You can imagine the ring cadences that everybody would have to know. So if a call came in and you're on a party line, you know what your cadence is. Your phone would ring a lot more than a call would be coming to you because it would ring all the households. You would only pick up when it was your, pattern of ring to grab the call. Well, there were many folks that would lift up and listen in.
But just because there were many customers on a party line, that didn't mean the phone was exactly ringing off the hook. It was a different era.
When we first wrote, we took these little sheets and it was like a penny postcard. And it was all filled in with the rent, and down on the lower half there was 9 lines, and that's where you wrote their toll calls. If it had over 9, you had to take a piece of paper and put it together, and then it was put in an envelope. Otherwise, it was actually sent out as a postcard. And there were many times the 9 lines were used up. People didn't make calls like they did today.
The Wittenberg Telephone Company gradually expanded its customer base during the first couple of decades and then significantly grew with a partnership with the Niagara Telephone Company in 1941. 1953 witnessed the construction of the company's building that remains its home today.
They got an automatic step-by-step switch, which was this beautiful mechanical behemoth that would take up a large room. It was a series of mechanical levers. I think there would be 5 to make your call. Like one, they had these little silo type canisters that would protect from the elements, but you'd see at the bottom some of the mechanical apparatus, and they'd pick up the phone, and then that one would open up the line, and then the first digit would be dialed. So you dial a 4, and older folks will remember hearing this. When you release it, it goes click, 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 click. So in the office, that second one's going click, 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 and then they dial the next number. It's a 1, click. And sometimes even you could hear it if there was a trouble on a line. You could hear this crosstalk, so you could kind of hear that da-da-da-da-da-da. So they didn't need the operators anymore. The operators lost their job in 1967 when we transferred over to that.
The automatic electric switch that landed in Wittenberg in 1967 introduced the dial tone, which meant that customers could directly dial a number instead of having to give it to the operator. Early phone numbers were only 2 to 4 digits and were displayed with the city name as a prefix in the directory.
I gave out the numbers. He told me how he wanted it done, Ray did. And so I just made numbers. This and this and this and numbers. And then went through trying to pick the catchy numbers for the businesses. And I took calls for a long time from people who would say, well, what is so-and-so's number, Long after I retired, people would call my house. Say, Ruth, what is that number? I can't find it in the directory. I knew every number of everybody when I worked here. It made work easier.
Those phone numbers grew to 7 digits, and party lines were eventually phased out by the 1980s. Phone use had become a part of life, as did television. After decades of watching over-the-air broadcast programming, consumers wanted more.
Well then, in the 80s, cable television started coming along. Wittenberg Telephone Company actually pursued it. They alone pursued the village of Wittenberg to get a franchise, but then they decided to hand it off to make a separate entity. And my father is of the opinion, we do not want this community asset to get in hands of outside large faceless corporations, and then, we're stuck.
I was one of the stockholders. There was an independent company, Wittenberg Cable TV at the time. We got stockholders together and raised some money and put cable TV in Wittenberg. And then 1987, I believe, is when we sold it to Wittenberg Telephone Company, because I was doing it as a kind of a side job, and we were getting up to 300 customers at the time, which was bigger than we ever thought it was going to be. And so Wittenberg Telephone Company bought it, and now a lot of the cable TV is on the fiber optic going out to all the rural areas.
Fiber optic cable took hold in the 1990s in Wittenberg thanks to its highly improved speed and efficiency. In 1991, fiber optic cable enabled education technology that was decades ahead of its time.
The Irving network was the state's first two-way interactive video distance learning network. Very first one, and it connected 7 small rural schools. They were all connected via fiber, and that was a huge undertaking because we had to bury fiber to most of those communities. Wittenberg was one of those 7 companies that participated in that, and that was a milestone. 3 TVs in each room, so a teacher could teach their class plus 3 remote classes simultaneously. So in Bowler, for example, where they only had 1 or 2 students that wanted to take German, the Clintonville German teacher could teach German and have those 2 students participate and get that class that they couldn't have gotten before. Another milestone that Wittenberg participated in as it relates to fiber is the purchase of the Antigo fiber network. And the city of Antigo built their own fiber network, and they were trying to provide fiber to their customers in Antigo in competition with their local telephone company. And it didn't go well. They were losing a lot of money, and we came in and purchased the network, and within a few years it was profitable, and it's growing, and it's a major piece of our network and our customers today.
The Wittenberg Telephone Company dipped its toes in the cell phone business, but instead found profitability in renting out cell phone towers to regional and national providers, in addition to renting access to its fiber network. As technology has skyrocketed in the past few decades, the company has kept up.
Landlines aren't our primary products anymore. It's more broadband internet and what the consumer needs at home. You know, we always tell the story today, when you're at home, you know, tell the kids you don't have water, and they'd be like, yeah, okay, whatever. Tell the kids the Wi-Fi is out, right? The house is gonna burn down. When I came in, it was set up well because of all the change that they've handled to that point, and we continue to adapt to that change. In the, you know, just over coming up on, I think it's 3 years this year that I've been here. The bandwidth usage, so our uplinks to the internet from the company as a whole, has increased 250%. When I got here, we were like 2.5 to 3 gig of traffic on a peak night. Now we're peaking at almost 8.5 gig this previous week, and it continues to go up.
Technology and consumer habits have changed dramatically since Ray Peterson started the business in 1921, and even since the days of his son, Sidney, who oversaw the operation until his passing in 2007. What has not changed is the Wittenberg Telephone Company's dedication to community and customer service.
Every year, one of the guys take the bucket truck, go up and down all the streets and hang every single Christmas light, every year, you know, and they would just do that for the community. We're just like a hometown company where everybody knows everybody, and you come in and you maybe talk about the ball game last night, or you talk about what happened at church the day before, or you know, it's just, they just want to come in and talk.
I don't know if my grandpa could ever have imagined that I'd be sitting here. What was the garage, the original garage of the building? Talking about how this is still a major family-owned and locally owned company. I know my dad would be proud.
From party lines to broadband internet, the Wittenberg Telephone Company has connected the community, checking in with other farmers, phone calls to family members, emails around the world, and more recently, connecting the community in the midst of a global pandemic. 100 years and ready for more as the Wittenberg Telephone Company enters its next 100 years as Cirrinity.